What happens when a ruthless mafia boss, who has spent decades building walls around his heart, meets an 8-year-old girl with 50 crumpled dollars and the most heartbreaking request he's ever heard? In the bustling streets of Chicago, where loyalty is bought with blood and trust is a luxury few can afford, an unlikely encounter is about to change two lives forever. Sometimes the most dangerous men need the smallest hands to show them what they've been missing all along. The autumn wind cut through Chicago's Little Italy like a knife, carrying the scent of garlic and old promises through the narrow streets. Vincent Vinnie Marconi sat alone at Cafe Romano, his usual corner table positioned perfectly to watch both entrances. At 52, his salt and pepper hair was slicked back in the same style he'd worn for 30 years, and his tailored charcoal suit spoke of money earned in shadows. He stirred his espresso methodically, the tiny spoon clinking against porcelain in a rhythm that matched his calculated thoughts. The cafe was nearly empty at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday, just how he preferred it. Fewer eyes, fewer problems. His phone buzzed with messages from his lieutenants, but Vinnie ignored them. These stolen moments of solitude had become precious to him lately, though he'd never admit it to anyone. The bell above the door chimed, and Vinnie's trained eyes immediately assessed the newcomer. What he saw made him pause mid-sip. A small girl, maybe 8 years old, with tangled auburn hair and clothes that had seen better days. Her sneakers had holes near the toes, and her backpack was held together with duct tape. She looked around the cafe with wide green eyes that held too much worry for someone her age. The girl's gaze landed on Vinnie, and something in her expression shifted. Determination replaced uncertainty as she walked directly toward his table, clutching something in her small fist. Every instinct screamed at Vinnie to leave. Children meant complications, and complications meant exposure. But something about her steady approach rooted him to his chair. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but surprisingly steady. "Are you someone important?" Vinnie raised an eyebrow, setting down his cup. "Depends on who's asking, kid." She glanced around nervously, then stepped closer. "My name is Emma, and I need to hire someone who looks official." Her eyes took in his expensive suit, the gold watch, the confidence he wore like armor. "You look like someone who gets things done." Despite himself, Vinnie was intrigued. "What kind of things?" Emma reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled wad of bills. 5s, 10s, and 1s, clearly saved over months. She placed it on the table between them with the solemnity of a business transaction. "Here's $50. I counted it 3 times. "That's quite a bit of money for someone your age," Vinnie observed, his voice gentler than usual. "What exactly are you trying to buy?" The girl's lower lip trembled slightly, but she lifted her chin with a courage that reminded Vinnie of soldiers he'd known. "I need a dad for one day. Just one day." Before we continue with Emma's heartbreaking story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to hear more incredible tales that will touch your heart. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The words hung in the air between them like smoke from his cigarette. Vinnie had heard many strange requests in his line of work, people begging for mercy, asking for favors, offering information. But this was different. This wasn't about fear or greed or desperation in the way he understood it. This was about something much more fundamental. "A dad," he repeated slowly, studying the girl's face. "For one day." Emma nodded vigorously. "Tomorrow is the father-daughter dance at my school. All the other kids have dads or stepfathers or uncles or someone, but I just have my mom, and she works 3 jobs and can't take time off." Her voice cracked slightly. "I don't want to be the only one there alone again." Vinnie felt something stir in his chest, an unfamiliar tightness that had nothing to do with the heart condition his doctor kept warning him about. He looked at this small girl, offering him everything she had for something that should have been free, a father's love. "Kid," he said carefully, "you don't know who you're talking to." "I know you're someone who matters," Emma replied with startling insight. "I can tell by how everyone looks at you when they think you're not watching. My mom says important people can make things happen when they want to." The autumn light streaming through the cafe window caught the hope in her eyes, and for the first time in decades, Vincent Marconi found himself completely out of his depth. Vincent stared at the crumpled bills on the table, each one representing hours of a child's hope and sacrifice. The cafe suddenly felt too warm, too small, too exposed. He could hear his father's voice echoing from 30 years ago. Family business stays in the family, everyone else is expendable. Yet here sat a girl who wasn't family, wasn't business, wasn't anything but genuine need wrapped in second-hand clothes. "Where's your father?" he asked, immediately regretting the directness when he saw Emma's face crumple slightly. "He left when I was 4, she said matter-of-factly, in the way children learn to discuss painful truths. "Mom says he wasn't ready to be a dad. She works at the diner on Roosevelt Road during the day, cleans offices at night, and does weekend shifts at the grocery store. She tries, but she's always tired." Vinny knew Roosevelt Road well. It cut through the heart of working-class Chicago, where people like Emma's mother fought invisible battles every day just to keep their heads above water. He'd driven past that diner countless times in his armored sedan, never thinking about the servers inside struggling to make rent. "This dance," he said slowly, "tell me about it." Emma's eyes lit up with the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "It's at Jefferson Elementary, in the gymnasium. They decorate it with streamers and balloons, and there's punch and cookies. The dads wear suits, and the daughters wear their prettiest dresses. They play music, and everyone dances." Her expression dimmed slightly. "Last year I went alone and sat in the corner reading a book. Mrs. Patterson, my teacher, tried to dance with me, but it wasn't the same." The image of this small girl sitting alone, while other children danced with their fathers, hit Vinny harder than he expected. He'd built his reputation on being unmoved by sob stories, on making decisions based purely on calculation and advantage. Emotion was weakness in his world, and weakness got you killed. "What makes you think I'd be any good at this dad thing?" he asked, testing her resolve. "You're here alone, just like me," Emma observed with startling perceptiveness, "and you didn't laugh at me or tell me to go away. That's more than most adults do." She was right, though he'd never articulated it that way. Vinny ate alone, slept alone, made decisions alone. His lifestyle demanded isolation, but lately, that isolation felt more like imprisonment. When was the last time someone had looked at him with anything other than fear or calculation? His phone buzzed insistently. A text from Tommy, his right-hand man. "Boss, we need to talk about the roasty situation." "Where are you?" The real world was calling, reminding him who he was and what he had to lose. Getting involved with this girl could expose him, make him vulnerable, give his enemies ammunition. Every rule he'd lived by for 3 decades screamed at him to walk away. But Emma was still sitting there, watching him with those green eyes that held no judgment, no fear, no hidden agenda, just hope. "Your mom know you're here asking strangers to pretend to be your father?" he asked. Emma shook her head. "She'd be upset. She always says we don't need anyone else, that we're strong together. But I see how she looks at the other families at school events. She wants me to have what they have too." The honesty was devastating. This 8-year-old girl was trying to solve problems that should never have been hers to carry. She was protecting her mother while trying to fill a void that $50 couldn't possibly cover. Vinny picked up the money, and Emma's face fell. She thought he was rejecting her offer. Instead, he carefully folded the bills and handed them back to her. "Keep your money, kid," he said gruffly, "but I'll make you a deal. Tomorrow night, I'll be your dad for the dance. No charge." Emma's mouth dropped open in disbelief. "Really? You mean it?" "I mean it, but we do this right. What time does it start?" 7 o'clock, she whispered, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell. "I'll pick you up at 6:30. "What's your address?" As Emma wrote her address on a napkin with a stubby pencil from her backpack, Vinny wondered what the hell he was getting himself into. In 48 hours, he'd either have given a lonely girl the best night of her childhood, or he'd have compromised everything he'd spent his life building. Looking at Emma's radiant smile, he realized he didn't care which outcome awaited him. The next morning, Vincent Marconi stood in his penthouse closet, staring at rows of identical black suits that had served him well in boardrooms and back alleys alike. None of them seemed right for a father-daughter dance. The irony wasn't lost on him. A man who'd negotiated million-dollar deals and life-or-death situations was completely stumped by the wardrobe requirements for an 8-year-old's school event. His housekeeper, Maria, knocked softly on the door. She'd worked for him for 15 years and had learned to read his moods better than most of his associates. "Mr. Marconi, you seem troubled this morning." "Maria," he said, surprising himself with the question that followed, "what does a father wear to take his daughter to a school dance?" Maria's eyebrows shot up, but her decades of working for unconventional employers had taught her not to ask too many questions. "Something approachable, sir. Navy blue perhaps, and no tie. Fathers at school events don't wear ties unless it's a formal occasion." While Maria selected appropriate attire, Vinny called Tommy. "I need you to cancel everything for today. Personal business. Boss, the roasty mating. Handle it yourself. And Tommy, I need a favor. There's a little girl who needs a dress for tonight. Something nice but not flashy. Size? Hell, I don't know. 8-year-old size." Tommy's confused silence stretched across the phone line. In 30 years of working together, Vinny had never mentioned children, let alone shopping for them. "You want me to buy a dress for a kid? Use your sister. She has daughters, right? Tell her it's important." That afternoon, Vinny found himself in uncharted territory, sitting in his Cadillac outside Emma's apartment building on the south side. The neighborhood was a patchwork of struggle and hope. Cracked sidewalks lined with flowers planted in coffee cans, buildings that had seen better decades but were kept clean by residents who refused to give up. Emma emerged from the building at exactly 6:30, and Vinny's breath caught. Someone had braided her auburn hair with small white flowers, and she wore a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes. But it was her expression that hit him hardest, pure, unbridled joy mixed with nervous excitement. "Mr. Vincent," she called out, using the name he'd given her. "You came." "Course I came," he said gruffly, getting out to open her door. "We had a deal, didn't we?" As they drove toward Jefferson Elementary, Emma chattered nervously about her classmates, her favorite songs, and her hope that the cookies would be chocolate chip. Vinny found himself genuinely listening, something he rarely did anymore. In his world, conversations were usually strategic exchanges of information. This was different, innocent, honest, refreshing. "Are you nervous?" Emma asked suddenly. The question caught him off guard. "Should I be?" "A little," she admitted. "I am. What if the other kids ask questions? What if I say something wrong?" Vinny pulled into the school parking lot and turned to face her. "Listen to me, Emma. Tonight, you're not the girl without a father. You're just a girl at a dance with someone who cares about her having a good time. That's all that matters." The school gymnasium had been transformed into something magical. Streamers in purple and gold hung from the ceiling, round tables were decorated with small centerpieces, and a DJ played family-friendly music from the corner. Fathers in casual suits and khakis stood chatting while their daughters ran between tables, showing off dresses and shoes. As they walked in together, Vinny noticed the subtle looks, some curious, some approving, some questioning. He'd spent his life reading rooms, assessing threats and opportunities. Here, the stakes were different but somehow higher. This wasn't about money or territory. This was about whether a little girl would feel like she belonged. Emma, a blonde girl in a pink dress, rushed over. "You came, and you brought your dad." "This is Mr. Vincent," Emma said proudly, her small hand slipping into his large one with surprising naturalness. "Nice to meet you," the girl said politely. "I'm Sarah. Emma talks about you all the time." Vinny's eyebrows rose as he looked down at Emma, who blushed furiously. Apparently, she'd been preparing for this moment longer than either of them had realized. The evening unfolded like a movie montage. Vinny found himself making small talk with other fathers about work and weather, carefully avoiding specifics about his consulting business. He watched Emma glow as she introduced him to her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, who seemed genuinely pleased to see her students so happy. When the DJ announced the father-daughter dance, Vinny felt his chest tighten. He'd never danced with a child before. Hell, he'd barely danced with adults, but Emma looked up at him with such trust, such hope, that he found himself leading her onto the floor. As they swayed to a gentle ballad, other couples dancing around them, Emma whispered, "Thank you for being my dad tonight." For the first time in 30 years, Vincent Marconi felt tears threaten behind his eyes. The father-daughter dance had ended, but the evening was far from over. As families began to filter out of the decorated gymnasium, Emma tugged at Vincent's sleeve. "Can we stay a little longer? I don't want it to end yet." Vincent checked his watch, 9:15 p.m. In his regular life, this was when business often got serious, when meetings moved from restaurants to warehouses, when decisions were made that affected people's futures. Tonight, the most important decision was whether to let an 8-year-old girl extend her perfect evening by a few more minutes. "Of course we can stay," he said, and Emma's smile was brighter than all the gymnasium's fluorescent lights combined. As they sat at their table sharing the last of the chocolate chip cookies, Mrs. Patterson approached. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the patient demeanor that came from years of teaching children. "Mr. Vincent," she said warmly, "I wanted to thank you for coming tonight. Emma has been so excited about this dance, but I know it's been difficult for her in the past." Vincent nodded, unsure how to respond. He'd never received gratitude for simply showing up before. "She's mentioned you several times over the past few weeks," Mrs. Patterson continued. "It's wonderful that you've been able to spend time with her. Single mothers like Emma's work so hard, but children need positive male role models too." The weight of her words settled on Vincent's shoulders. Emma had been talking about him for weeks, had been building up to this moment, creating a story about a father figure who cared about her. The realization that he'd become important to someone without even knowing it was both humbling and terrifying. After Mrs. Patterson moved on to say goodbye to other families, Emma looked up at him with serious eyes. "Can I tell you a secret?" "Sure, kid." "I didn't just ask you because you looked important," she said quietly. "I asked you because you looked lonely too, like me." The simple observation hit Vincent harder than any punch he'd ever taken. Out of the mouths of babes, his mother used to say, children saw things adults spent lifetimes trying to hide. "You think I look lonely?" he asked. Emma nodded solemnly. "The same way I feel when I watch other kids with their dads. Like you're on the outside, looking in." She was right, though he'd never acknowledged it even to himself. Somewhere along the way, building walls to protect himself had also built a prison. He'd gained power, respect, and fear, but he'd lost connection, spontaneity, and joy. As they prepared to leave, Emma's teacher handed her a small disposable camera. "I took some pictures of you and your dad dancing," she said. "Make sure your mom gets copies." In the parking lot, Vincent helped Emma into the car, and she immediately started chattering about every detail of the evening: who wore what, which songs were the best, how the punch was too sweet, but the cookies were perfect. Her joy was infectious, and Vincent found himself smiling more than he had in years. When they pulled up to her apartment building, Emma's mood shifted. The magic was ending, and they both felt it. "Will I see you again?" she asked quietly. The question he'd been dreading. In Vincent's world, connections were dangerous. People who cared about you could be used against you. People you cared about became targets. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to make this a beautiful one-time memory. But looking at Emma's hopeful face, Vincent realized that some things were worth the risk. "How about this?" he said carefully. "Maybe I could take you for ice cream sometime. Nothing fancy, just friends hanging out." Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? You'd want to?" "I'd want to," he admitted, and was surprised to find it was completely true. As Emma got out of the car, she turned back one more time. "Mr. Vincent, tonight was the best night of my whole life." Vincent watched her walk into the building, her small figure disappearing into the lobby. He sat in his car for several minutes afterward, processing what had just happened to him. Somewhere between the crumpled $50 and the father-daughter dance, Vincent Marconi had started to remember who he used to be before the family business consumed everything good in him. His phone buzzed with messages from Tommy and the others, returning him to reality. There would be consequences for tonight, questions about where he'd been, why he'd been unreachable, who might have seen him. In his line of work, unexplained absences raised suspicions, and suspicions led to problems. But as he drove through the Chicago streets toward his empty penthouse, Vincent realized he didn't care about the complications. For the first time in decades, he'd spent an evening being genuinely needed for something good, something pure, something that had nothing to do with fear or obligation. Emma had asked him to be her father for one day, but somehow she'd given him something far more valuable in return, a glimpse of the man he might have been in a different life. 3 weeks had passed since the father-daughter dance, and Vincent Marconi's life had taken on an unexpected rhythm. Tuesday afternoons meant ice cream with Emma at Sal's parlor on Taylor Street. Thursday evenings were homework help sessions at the diner where her mother worked, with Vincent nursing coffee while Emma tackled math problems at a corner booth. These simple routines had become the highlights of his week, though he'd never admit it to his associates. The changes hadn't gone unnoticed. Tommy had started giving him questioning looks when Vincent declined late-night meetings or cut business dinners short. His driver, Frank, had raised an eyebrow when asked to stop at toy stores and ice cream shops. But Vincent had weathered suspicious looks before. He could handle them now. What he couldn't handle was the call that came on a gray November afternoon. "Mr. Vincent," Emma's voice was small and scared over the phone. "Can you come to the hospital? Mom collapsed at work, and I don't know what to do." Vincent was out the door before she finished speaking, his usual careful departure protocol forgotten. He found Emma in the pediatric waiting area of Northwestern Memorial, still in her school clothes, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit he'd never seen before. "What happened?" he asked, kneeling down to her level. "She just fell down during her shift at the diner," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Mrs. Rodriguez brought me here, but she had to go get her own kids. The doctors won't tell me anything because I'm not 18. Vincent felt a familiar rage building, but this time it wasn't directed at rival families or business complications. It was aimed at a system that left children alone and scared in hospital waiting rooms. "Come with me," he said, taking Emma's hand. At the information desk, Vincent Marconi deployed the same commanding presence that had secured million-dollar deals and territorial agreements. Within minutes, he'd navigated the bureaucracy, spoken with doctors, and learned that Emma's mother, Lisa, had collapsed from exhaustion and dehydration, the predictable result of working 3 jobs while trying to raise a child alone. "She needs rest," Dr. Martinez explained. "Complete rest for at least a week, maybe more. Her body has been running on fumes for too long." "What about Emma?" Vincent asked. The doctor glanced at the little girl, who was pretending not to listen while studying her hands. "Child services will need to be contacted unless there's a relative who can take temporary custody." "No," Emma said quickly, fear creeping into her voice. "Mom says we don't have any family, it's just us." Vincent made a decision that would have shocked anyone who knew him. "She can stay with me." The words surprised him as much as they did Dr. Martinez and Emma. He'd never had a child in his home, never considered himself capable of caring for anyone that young and vulnerable. But the alternative, Emma being placed with strangers while her mother recovered, was unacceptable. The next week transformed Vincent's carefully ordered world into controlled chaos. His penthouse, previously a monument to bachelor minimalism, suddenly contained coloring books, cartoon pajamas, and a small girl who asked endless questions about everything from his coffee machine to the paintings on his walls. Emma turned out to be remarkably adaptable. She did her homework at his kitchen island while he conducted business calls, quietly coloring while he reviewed contracts. She seemed to understand instinctively that some conversations required her to wear the headphones he'd bought her, and she never asked questions about the serious-looking men who occasionally visited. In return, Vincent found himself experiencing life through her eyes. Simple things he'd forgotten to notice, the way morning light hit the windows, the satisfaction of a perfectly scrambled egg, the joy of finding a movie they both enjoyed, became sources of unexpected pleasure. The most surprising changes were in his business relationships. When a particularly aggressive negotiation with a rival family threatened to turn violent, Vincent found himself thinking about Emma waiting for him at home. He chose de-escalation over confrontation, compromise over conquest. His associates were puzzled by his suddenly diplomatic approach, but results were results. "You've gone soft, Vinny," Tony Roasty said after a meeting where Vincent had accepted terms his old self would have rejected. "Time was, you'd have burned down half the city before taking a deal like that." "Maybe I'm just getting smarter in my old age," Vincent replied, but privately he knew Tony was right. He had gone soft, and he didn't care. On Friday evening, as they sat on his couch sharing takeout Chinese food while watching a nature documentary about penguins, Emma looked up at him with serious eyes. "Mr. Vincent, when Mom gets better, do I have to stop coming to see you?" The question he'd been dreading